I'm the world's greatest superhero.
You're my greatest failure.
Skyrim is a game all about failure, and the Dragonborn coming in to fix those failures. A lot of what's presented in the game is in decline, whether it's the Empire, Skyrim the country, or its many guilds, but this isn't why the Dragonborn was put in Helgen. Sure, making the Dark Brotherhood what it's meant to be, and bringing the Thieves Guild back to its glory days appeases two gods, Sithis and Nocturnal respectively, but this isn't the god we, as the Dragonborn, have a specific relationship with. No, as our title suggests, we are tied to Akatosh, sent to defeat his wayward son for possibly one of two reasons. Still, Alduin isn't Akatosh's only failure that he sends John Skyrim here to deal with. The main story, Dragonborn, and even Dawnguard are all because of Akatosh's failures, something we're looking at today. So if you don't mind the slight clickbait, and sorry about that one, I'm trying to play the game a bit more, let's take a look at an overriding theme in Skyrim: failure.
I am as my father Akatosh made me, as are you, Dovahkiin.
So let's begin with the obvious. Why is there this association with the Dragonborn and Akatosh? Well, Akatosh is the dragon god of time, and is thus the father of dragons. His children include Alduin, the rest of the flying lizards, and us, who have the soul and blood of a dragon, but the body of a mortal. I guess this could make us a collaborative effort with Kain/Kinnereth, if you're playing a human, which is the case with the default John Skyrim over here. Now, it is worth noting that we aren't the same as the Dragonborn emperors of the Septim dynasty. I know there are a lot of parallels with Tiber Septim and us, but the main difference between them and us is purpose. You see, Akatosh once made a covenant with the first ever Empress of Cyrodiil, the slave queen and saint Alassea. He had backed her, and in exchange he gave her the Amulet of Kings to light the dragonfires, keeping the forces of Oblivion from entering Nirn. A part of this also meant that Alassea and her bloodline were made Dragonborn so that they, and only they, could wear the Amulet of Kings, charged with keeping the dragonfires lit. While Alessia's line had officially ended, and her empire eventually crumbled, this dragon blood continued through two other founding emperors, Remen Cyrodiil and Tiber Septim, but the covenant with Akatosh ended when the Amulet of Kings was broken, when Martin Septim mantled the dragon god and drove back Maer and Dagon back to the Deadlands. Ever since then, there hasn't been a need for a Dragonborn to keep the dragonfires lit, since the dragonfires are no longer required to keep the Oblivion Gates shut after Martin's sacrifice. Simply put, there's no need for us, as a Dragonborn, to fulfill this specific purpose, especially because we collect Daedric artifacts like their limited edition Pokemon cards. I mean, this shiny Charizard is going for 500,000 Septims. Damn. Now this is why I propose that we get put on Nirn to act as Akatosh's champion and fix his many mistakes. Let's begin with mistake 1, the main quest and Alduin.
Such arrogance, to dare take for yourself the name of Dova.
Despite many of us choosing to avoid the main quest like the plague, Alduin is the primary villain of the game. He appears in Helgen right as we enter the picture, but identifying the mistake Akatosh wants us to fix here depends on what you think Alduin's motivations actually are. Granted, you don't actually have to worry about the mistake, because their fixing is achieved in the same way. Blowing him up. Eat that, World Eater, ye neek. Anyway, on the surface, the game presents Alduin as coming back from his rule, and going to Sovngarde after we dragon rend him to power up and go full mukbang on the world, ending it then and there. If this is the case, then we're sent by Akatosh just after Alduin returns from his Elder Scrolls induced timeout to prevent the world from ending, since it isn't yet time, fixing Akatosh's mistake of having an over-eager firstborn too keen on doing his job. Still, whether intentionally or by some iffy writing, a popular theory has spawned that Alduin's goal isn't actually to end the world. No, he intends to rule it instead, and we are sent not to save the world and stop the cycle, but to ensure that it ends when it's meant to, so that a new world can begin, right on time. We are then the Doom Herald, rather than the Doom Preventer.
Oh man.
Are you winning, son?
So, why do so many people in the Elder Scrolls fanbase, including me, think that Alduin isn't around to eat the world? Well, one funny reason is look at the size of him. I can see him eating a horse, but the world? Probably not. I mean, he's really not that big. But then again, the whole eating of the world thing could be metaphorical and he could grow, so that's not a genuine reason. A genuine reason would be the state we find Alduin in. You see, Alduin is actually very, very young for a dragon, despite being the firstborn of Akatosh, since he's been booted forward in time from the Merithic era to the 4th era, which is several thousands of years. For context, the cycle of Mundus, also known as a Kalpa, hasn't been that long, so Alduin has actually been booted out of time for longer than he's been alive. The last thing he was doing was stomping out a rebellion in what was essentially a dragon-led empire. His first thought wasn't to beeline it to Sovngarde to start powering up for a legendary appearance on the Nikocado Avocado channel. No, it's to revive his boys and get his army together, which says to me that he's gearing up to try to re-establish his empire, except his empire isn't meant to be around anymore. Its time is over, and Alduin's displacement from time, via the Elder Scroll, has sort of ruined everything. By this point, Alduin should be a lot older and maybe chilled from his rebellious phase of walking away from Akatosh's intended path and having him end the world. Strangely, Paarthurnax talks about how Akatosh is following his destiny in his own way, but the dialogue that makes me think that Alduin has gone against his world-eating destiny is...
Happy? No, I am not happy. Ze mahi lost ondul bormahu. Alduin was once the crown of our father Akatosh's creation.
Calling Alduin once the crown of Akatosh's creation, and that Alduin was created to eat the world, is some pretty decent evidence, especially coming from party snacks over here. It at least means that Alduin isn't doing what Akatosh wants him to anymore, so we have to blow him up. What can you do? But the thing is, he isn't the only one of Akatosh's failures we have to fix. Let's move on to Dawnguard.
This land feels twisted. I'm surprised my father didn't want to live out here.
Now for me, Dawnguard has always felt disjointed from the other two main stories. While two dragons can turn up in the Forgotten Vale, breaking through the ice in one of the cooler moments of the DLC, it doesn't really feel like the Dawnguard storyline requires us to be Dragonborn as much as the other two. And our status as the one with Akatosh's draconic blood seems to be a bit of a footnote. I would even go as far as to say that we aren't even the main character of Dawnguard. Serana is. We're just the hydrogen bomb she keeps around to deal with her problems. But the interesting thing is that, while she is what the plot revolves around, being a daughter of Coldharbour, while her father is the main villain, everything only happens because of another one of Akatosh's failures acting as a puppet master. Or rather Auriel's failure. Arch-Curate Vyrthur. Now you might be thinking, why is Akatosh's failure here the reason we have the Dawnguard DLC? Last time you checked, Harkon was the final boss. Well, Serana mentions that while the family dynamic with the Volkihars was never great because, Molag Bal, it only fell apart when Harkon discovered the tyranny of the Sun prophecy. And who made that prophecy? Vyrthur. He set it all in motion, all because of Auriel. Now, Auriel is another iteration of Akatosh. Kinda. It can get quite complicated, and there are plenty of theories and odd bits of lore about the two. Honestly, I'm kinda underselling it here. It's as confusing as anything, and I have a whole video on Akatosh to explain these oddities, but note that Auriel shows older records of being worshipped than Akatosh. You can kinda see him as an earlier form, since he was originally an elven deity and was said to have used Auriel's bow to fight against humanity, shooting Lorkhan's heart into the Red Mountain, all the way back in the Dawn era, the first era in Nirn's history. Long story short, the elves are Auriel's day ones, and it's important to note that Archcurate Vyrthur belongs to one of the ancient varieties of these elves. Think of the Aelids, the Chimera, and the Snow Elves. Sure, the Chimera ended up worshipping Daedric princes, but the Snow Elves still heavily worshipped Auriel, and with a title like Archcurate, it's clear that Vyrthur would have been one of Auriel's most avid worshippers. It is odd then that when Vyrthur was bitten by a vampire, he turned into one, abandoned by Auriel. Serana even says that Auriel should have protected him from vampirism, but this was obviously not the case. And it's also worth noting that Serana should know a lot about being a vampire. Not only is she one, she's also a worshipper of Molag Bal, the father of vampires. Granted, Aedra have been known for abandoning their followers after they became vampires, as was the case with Arkay and the first vampire, Lemay Bal, who likely remains Molag Bal's most pitiable victim even after all this time. Since Auriel is a sun god, becoming a sun-fearing being doesn't exactly put you in his good books. Now, to cut Auriel some slack, the elven part of him may have been expunged from reality. I go over this in the previously mentioned Akatosh video, but during the rule of the Alessian Empire, there was a cult following the tenets of an ape man named Miraak. These ape men are known as the Imgur, and I wouldn't mind playing them in the next Elder Scrolls, if anyone from Bethesda is watching. I doubt it though. Either way, as part of these tenets, they wish to remove the elven part of Akatosh, essentially Auriel, from reality, and made a gigantic dragon break known as the Middle Dawn. We are unsure if these cultists were successful, but if they were, Auriel might not exist anymore. And if this is the case, Akatosh could be sending us to deal with the aftermath of his predecessor's removal. This also depends on the timeline, since this specific dragon break happened somewhere in the middle of the First Era, and Vyrthur could have been around since the Merithic, considering that this is the era in which Iskamor and his 500 companions were purging the Snow Elves from Skyrim. If Vyrthur was made a vampire before this, then I guess Auriel really did abandon him, and we are here to silence the rowdy Forsaken priest, who is causing too much of a scene. If not, then I suppose you can say that this is evidence that the elven part of Akatosh was expunged from reality, and that there really isn't an Auriel to pray for anymore. This would also mean that there's a tragedy in Vyrthur's attempted vengeance, for the god he seeks vengeance upon no longer exists. And thus Akatosh could actually be seeking a mercy through us, by sending us to correct this failure of Auriel's. Simply by the gods not existing, we are putting one of his most ardent servants out of their misery. Or Dragon Dad just doesn't want a lunatic blotting out the sun, which has always been a strong measure of time. Either explanation works, I suppose. And then us taking out Harkon is to ensure that this vengeance upon Auriel isn't carried out following Vyrthur's demise. Still, with Vyrthur not really being the main big bad of the DLC he appears in, I think it's about time we move on to Akatosh's strangest failure, and the one that's best at aura farming. Miraak.
You fight valiantly against fate, but I am stronger here.
Out of all of the other Dragonborns throughout the history of the Elder Scrolls, and there have been quite a few, Miraak is probably the most similar to us. He doesn't have the dragon blood because of some covenant signed by an ancestor. Instead, it seems he was put on Nirn for a specific purpose, and given this dragon blood to do this purpose. But what this specific purpose is eludes me somewhat. What is clear is that he refused to do it, unlike us, who put the beat down on Alduin something fierce. Well, I'm talking more about generic John Skyrim than the Dragonborns in the Scrolls community, because most of us don't bother with the main quest on a playthrough, but you lot are smart, you get my point. Now, if we're trying to give Akatosh some credit here, he theoretically wouldn't have given Miraak the dragon blood all willy-nilly without a reason, and it seems that reason is the same as ours: deal with Alduin. Akatosh probably wasn't happy with Alduin not gearing up to eat the world like he's supposed to, and instead going around enslaving mortals, so he made one of his dragon priests a Dragonborn. Now, the reason I call Miraak Akatosh's strangest failure is that I don't really know what he expected out of Miraak specifically. So, we don't have a timeline on how Miraak became Dragonborn. We don't even have a timeline about how we became Dragonborn. As I mentioned before, Alassea was made Dragonborn through a covenant, while all of the others following her were born that way, which means that both we or Miraak could have been made a Dragonborn on a fateful day, or born with the dragon blood. This kinda confuses me, since if Miraak was made Dragonborn at a certain point in time, why him? Why choose him to defeat Alduin, if that was even his destiny? Miraak himself stated that he could have dealt with Alduin, and that he would later have to if he got out of Apocrypha if we didn't do it first, and we know this from the following two quotes.
They wanted to use me to deal with Alduin, Hakon and the rest. I chose otherwise. Felling Alduin was a mighty deed, and I thank you for it. He would have proved troublesome to me.
Miraak also acted in opposition to Alduin by essentially bending the will of his servants, getting a few of his dragon priests on side, starting a rebellion, and conspiring with Hermaeus Mora. Sure, he got his ass beat by Valok the Jailer, and then got locked up by the Calamari King, so we never got to see the later stages of Miraak's plans. His main goal in the Dragonborn DLC is to escape Apocrypha, and mentions that Solstheim will be mine, as he put it, so I'm assuming he wishes to be a kind of Dragonborn conqueror, perhaps in the vein of Alduin, when his cult was at its max power and beck and call. If this was his original goal, then he would have had to stop Alduin at some point. There's no way the firstborn of Akatosh would sit idly by while somebody's literally leeching all of his resources. I mean, he literally didn't. He sent Valok the Jailer to deal with Miraak. There is the argument that Miraak didn't want to fight Alduin with the Dawnguard trio, probably because the goal wasn't to free Skyrim, but to be its new cult leader. We don't 100% know though, because Miraak weirdly doesn't say a lot, and thus trying to work out what Akatosh intended for him, and how he failed the Dragon God, is only theoretical. What is known is that Miraak remains one of Akatosh's failures, whether he failed to be a hero and defeat Alduin to put him back on his destined path, or fail to take Alduin's place as the leader of the dragon cult is unknown, but fail he did. As we mentioned before, he was bested by Valok, and while the battle between the two dragon priests was an epic affair, turning Solstheim from a region in Skyrim to an island, all Avatar Kyoshi style, he needed to be saved by a Daedric prince. Now, if you'll remember my little tidbit about Akatosh hating Daedra and making a covenant to keep them out, you'll probably put two and two together and realise that Miraak turning to Mora for power puts him at odds with Akatosh's desire. whatever they may be. Miraak essentially decided that Akatosh and even Alduin's gifts were not enough. Also, remember that Miraak is a dragon priest on top of being a dragonborn, and that Alduin is technically an extension of Akatosh, as his firstborn and potentially shed skin, meaning that Miraak here got a double power up by the dragon god of time. We, the last Dragonborn, are only walking around with the dragon blood, not the immortality that comes with being a dragon priest, and yet that isn't enough for Miraak. He went out of his way to get even more power and knowledge from Herma Mora, and through that, sought to start his rebellion. And that is why, in my opinion, he is another of Akatosh's failures. For whatever reason, Akatosh had the bad luck, or perhaps bad decision making ability, to choose a man this power hungry, and this makes Miraak the final of Akatosh's failures we have to fix. That in mind, we cannot fix all of Akatosh's failures, not alone anyway, and we, the destined last Dragonborn, inevitably become one of them.
In the name of Kine, in the name of Shor, and in the name of Atmora of old, you are Ysmir now, a dragon of the north.
In Dawnguard and Dragonborn, we have the opportunity to become servants of Daedric princes, something very much not in Akatosh's desires. Now, to be fair, we don't have to give our souls to Molag Bal. We can maintain our mortality and still give Vyrthur a biblical beatdown, then turn Harkon into strawberry jam. As I said before, we're basically Serana's hydrogen bomb, but we need Hermaeus Mora to defeat Miraak. This kind of gives you some context as to how much more powerful everything we face in Dragonborn is compared to Dawnguard. In our first encounter with the first Dragonborn, he basically lays us out, even if we've already beaten Alduin, and it is clear that we need Hermaeus Mora's knowledge to give us a chance to confront Miraak. And even then, we're not the ones who land the finishing blow. The Kraken's nerdy cousin is. You could even argue that what Akatosh gave us wasn't enough for the task of dealing with his previous Dragonborn failure. Granted, Akatosh did better with us than with Miraak, considering that we saved the world twice over before going to Solstheim, provided we do things in order. Unfortunately, that isn't enough, and Hermaeus Mora doesn't do things for free. Now, I can't speak for how power hungry everyone's specific Dragonborn is, since Skyrim is an RPG, so this varies from player to player, but it's interesting that the game doesn't give us a choice with Herma Mora. If you want to beat Miraak, you need the Tentacle Man's help. In the end, we sort of become Hermaeus Mora's servant, as a replacement for Miraak. At least that's how Doc Ock here sees it, giving him the secrets of the skull, strengthening the Daedric Prince, something that Akatosh would historically want to avoid, yet fate, or I guess God Howard, doesn't give John Skyrim another choice. If Miraak was meant to put Alduin back on his rightful path, being the original solution to Akatosh's greatest and original failure, and didn't do it, we are essentially Miraak too. I know that there are Tiber Septim links as we stated before, considering that we get the same title as the founding emperor, Ysmir, but realistically we're more Miraak than Tiber. The Alduin we face might as well be the same Alduin that Miraak dealt with, maybe a few years on, since he was shunted unnaturally forward in time. It's the same Alduin, the same dragon cult, the same dragon priests, and we even work with the same Nordic heroes that Miraak originally rejected, learning their shouts and fighting alongside them in Sovngarde. Because we're working with Hermaeus Mora to deal with Miraak later on, you could even make the argument that Akatosh is making the same mistake with us. It's just not as severe this time. At the end of the day, Squid Game still ends up with Akatosh's most powerful mortal as an asset. Sure, we can chill outside of Apocrypha, unlike Miraak, but we are still Tentacle McGee's asset, whether we like it or not, and the full effect of this isn't really known until we get to Elder Scrolls 6. Will the Dragonborn get stuck in Apocrypha like with Miraak? Will we become a Cthulhu monster obsessed with books? Who knows? I'm not even sure Bethesda does, so I can't talk to the impact of this failure. I highly doubt John Skyrim is going to try to rule the world like Alduin and potentially Miraak, or blot out the sun for some revenge, like Arch-Curate Vyrthur. But it could mean that Tamriel loses one of its greatest heroes and defenders. We have largely been a success for Akatosh up until this point, but as we start working with Hermamora and go down the same path as Miraak, we end up like him, another one of the Dragon God's failures. This is interesting to me because you could argue that Oblivion is a story of Akatosh's success.
Stand true, my friend. May your heart be your guide, and the gods grant you strength.
One of Akatosh's greatest success stories was his covenant with Alassea, protecting Nirn from the Daedra. This covenant with Alessia's bloodline kept the world largely safe from the forces of Oblivion for a very long time, and when it was all going to fall apart in the climax of Oblivion's main quest, Martin Septim mantles Akatosh to defeat Mehrunes Dagon, and while the Septim dynasty ends during that fight, it permanently seals the rift from Oblivion to Nirn, representing a complete victory for Akatosh over the forces of the Daedra. Of course, the fall of the Septim dynasty causes absolute chaos in Tamriel, but that isn't really Akatosh's problem. It becomes Talos's problem, but I've covered him enough. You see, Akatosh is time itself, uncaring and never moving. His covenant resulted in a permanent shutting of the Oblivion gates, and that very much is a success. Perhaps that is the duality of Oblivion and Skyrim. Oblivion is the result of Akatosh's success, despite the severity of the Oblivion crisis. The Knights of the Nine expansion even involves the final defeat of Umaril the Unfeathered, an enemy of the Eight Divines all the way back in the First Era. The Shivering Isles is sort of his own thing, but Skyrim and all its main villains are a result of Akatosh's failures. His firstborn son, his once loyal servant, and his first attempt at a Dragonborn. And then there's us, the last Dragonborn, possibly his last attempt at making things right, and even then we end up in the clutches of Hermaeus Mora, meaning that Akatosh's greatest champion, the one to right his wrongs, ends up in the service of someone else. Someone, if his history is anything to go by, would be his enemy. And I don't know about you, but I would call that another failure. Thanks for watching, people. This has been less lore heavy and more about exploring the written themes of Skyrim. I appreciate that the writing of modern Bethesda isn't amazing, but there is often still something to decipher and discover in mediocrity, if that mediocre thing has something to say. This is me basically using every brain cell in my mind case, which isn't many, to try to find the thematic link between the main quest and the 2 DLC. I had to ignore Hearthfire because it's basically Minecraft, and this is what I came up with. While Talos is the one the country of Skyrim talks about a lot, Akatosh is at the centre of the game Skyrim, but I hope you liked this kind of ramble nonetheless. Consider it a sequel to my Akatosh's Weird video if you wish, and if you enjoyed, please do like, subscribe and comment. You know, the usual ritual that YouTube seems to love so very much. Hopefully you've also noticed that I've upgraded my recording equipment, although you might not, considering that YouTube does like to compress audio quite a lot. If this is the first video you've watched of me before, welcome to the library, and if not, thank you for your return visit. Hopefully I'll see you all in another video.
When darkness came, you wiped my tears. I remember your hand on mine. Now